The Mughal Empire ruled the Indian subcontinent from 1526 to 1857. Okay. This information is meant to go along with what you will find in the World in 1750 packet on the Mughal Empire. But remember that this is just to go along with it. It does not replace it. Everything in the packet is not discussed in the video. Okay, so Mughal Empire, 1526 to 1857. And you will find the Mughal Empire on the Indian subcontinent. The Mughal dynasty ruled all of what we would today consider India, nearly all of what we would consider Pakistan, some of modern day Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Okay. It was a fairly easy empire to defend from outside invaders because along the north, you are largely blocked out by the Himalaya Mountains, and being surrounded by water on the other sides always makes things easier. So by the 1700s, the empire is already starting to weaken. And the weakening is driven by primarily two factors. There are political factors and there are economic factors. We're going to discuss the economic factors first. Like the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire built much of its wealth and power surrounding trade. Okay, if you look where India is, okay, and this is where you would find the Mughal Empire, you'll see that it is directly connected both to the Silk Road trade routes and to the Indian Ocean trade routes. Okay. India itself produced and exported large quantities of cotton and some spices, but they also, in large part, controlled access to Chinese silk and controlled the trade in most other spices out of today what we would consider places like Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. Okay. In collaboration with the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire was able to largely ensure that all trade in and out of Asia passed through on these routes. But by the 1700s, Europeans had sailing technology that allowed them to skip the overland routes of the Silk Road, and they were slowly beginning to take control of the Indian Ocean trade routes, one by one conquering smaller countries to get their own footholds into the trade. So this impacts the economics of the Mughal Empire dramatically and also poses a political threat. Okay. All right. The political situation in the Mughal Empire is also starting to weaken. The Sultan, title for the ruler in the empire, had for centuries kept local and regional officials loyal by handing out large chunks of land and giving them control over that land. By the early 1700s, the empire was no longer expanding, so there was no new land to pass out. Okay. This starts to impact the loyalty of the mansabdars, the local officials, who increasingly start to rebel against the Sultan because they aren't being kept as happy and wealthy as they had been before. So now the Sultan is starting to have to deal with internal rebellions. Okay, we also see social change during the 1700s, including less official from the government religious tolerance in the empire. Keep in mind that while the Mughal dynasty is a Muslim ruling dynasty, India is a overwhelmingly majority Hindu country, so it is a Muslim minority ruling over a, even at that time, vast Hindu majority. And for a long time, that worked fine. There was religious tolerance, even degrees of religious equality. But this starts to fade, which leads to more internal violence. So now you have local officials more likely to challenge the rule of the Sultan. You have more conflict between religious groups. You also have increasing economic instability, which opens the door for the British to walk, or in reality, sail, right into this chaos and slowly begin to take over the Indian subcontinent. First, by having perfectly reasonable treaties with the Mughal Empire, allowing for trade footholds, and then allying with local leaders who oppose the empire, and finally just outright taking over the vast majority of the Indian subcontinent. So by the mid 1800s, India is no longer, the Indian subcontinent is now completely under British control and will remain that way for about 100 years.